Hello everybody, my name is Poison Ducky and today we're having another Total War Warhammer 2 replay. I'm giving you a lot of Tomb Kings lately because I just really enjoy the Tomb Kings. I love their unit diversity, their monsters, and just their overall theme. And we're going to be versing the Dark Elves, led by a Supreme Sorceress of Fire. Now over here in my army, I'm just going to have a fairly cheap front line, just spearmen on the flank, swords, skeleton warriors. Well, I actually have like I have a like zigzag formation or every other formation, or spearmen, swordsman, spearmen, swordsman, spearmen. So spearmen's on the flank and center, swordsman on the inner edges, and two units of skeleton archers to back them up with the range capabilities because the Tomb Kings have archers and other undead factions don't, which make them so fantastic. The lore that I will be bringing today is the mighty Settra the Imperishable, the anti-large armor piercing spellcaster, just an amazing overall combatant, along with being having the lore of Nekahara is just such a fantastic combination. I'm going to bring him on his horse, and he's going to be guarded or by the Tomb Prince, which is going to be give him Guardian, increases damage resistance by 15%, I believe, which is fantastic. Like, even though Settra, like, when you use Katep, you obviously need a Tomb Prince, or Katep's is going to go down. Settra is much less that. He's not squishy like Katep, but still, having a Tomb Prince in his bonuses is always nice to have, and it's just it's something that you should always go for. I think a Tomb Prince in every Tomb King's army is never a bad thing. It's kind of like Gorbel, right? On the right flank here, I'm going to have two units of Nekahara horsemen. Actually, I'm not going to have two units. I'm going to have a unit of skeleton horsemen. These are the 400 costing cheap spear cavalry, not shock cavalry. They only have 26 charge bonus, and their melee stats 22 melee attack and 26 melee defense is not awful. So they're kind of like a shock melee hybrid, but in reality, their stats are quite bad, and they're really meant to only kill like skirmishers and very low tier units. Over here on the left flank, I'm going to have the Necropolis Knights with halberds. Now, this is a fantastic. They're kind of like the Demigryph Knights with halberds equivalent of the Tomb Kings. Obviously, these are worse than that, the Demigryph Knights, in terms of combat stats and speed and all that. But the Necropolis Knights do handle well, and they have poison attack. So they always support the line in which they attack with. I like the Necropolis Knights, and they like me. On the far left flank, over cresting the hill, is going to be another unit of skeleton horsemen in deployment, vanguard deployment, and 3 units of skeleton horsemen archers. Now, these guys are going to be my main skirmish power alongside my 2 units of normal skeleton archers. So I have a lot of arrows in play here. I was expecting the Dark Elves to go more Dark Shard play, but you'll see what happens. And a unit to defend my back line all the way in the back with Stalk are the Eyes of the Desert, Regiment of Renown, Sepulchre Stalkers. Now, these guys have Stalk, poison attacks, and they have Vanguard deployment. I didn't utilize the Vanguard deployment because I just wanted to make sure my opponent could not see this unit, and as when they try to pressure my back line of archers with cavalry, Cold One Knights, something like that, Cold One Chariots, the Eyes of the Desert will be a somewhat surprise factor in trying to get him stop his backline pressure. Now, over here, my opponent playing the Dark Elves is going to have a front line of bleak swords, and this is the dangerous part. The Black Guard of Nagron. Now, these are halberd infantry, anti-large armor piercing, charge defense against large foes, 100 armor, 97 leadership. Now, look at those combat stacks, 36, 48. They have good weapon strength. These are essentially the Tomb King's killers, as Tomb Kings do not have very good anti-infantry through infantry, so they have no like Harganeth executioners. They have no great swords or something like that. So halberd infantry tend to be very effective against the Tomb Kings, as their infantry are just not cut to fight other infantry. So just a line of bleak swords, normal sword infantry, and 2 units of Black Guard of Nagron. He gets 3 units of Black Arc Corsairs with the hand bows. Now, these are going to be these are skirmish units that are very decent in melee combat. So if they get caught by let's say, cavalry of some sort, they'll kick back. They will probably lose, but they'll actually do a good amount of damage back. Now, on each flank, he's going to have a cold 1 a knight. These are anti-large armor-piercing raptor cavalry, I suppose. Cold 1 spear cavalry. Very dangerous, very cost-effective against my army. Another one on the right flank, and the mighty Charybdis. Now, this is a very powerful unit. It's anti-large. Again, this is essentially the Necrosphinx, except on their side, right? Poison attacks, very dangerous, and it's just overall a very good pick against the Tomb Kings if the Tomb Kings go full monster mash, but I did not, obviously. Of course, the Lord is going to be a Supreme Sorceress of Fire in the air on her Manticore, and I believe that is how the army is being introduced. Let's see how we play this one out. Now over here, I'm going to try to get my skirmish power into play, moving my cavalry up and moving my units up. I realize that I have a marginally better ranged firepower with my archers and skeleton archers. I'm just going to do some light skirmishing, shooting some arrows into the Supreme Sorceress Fire. I realize that if she dodges those, that would be a waste of arrows. So I'm going to see if I can get some nice side shots and some bleak swords. Unfortunately, my opponent repositions her units with her shield so that the shields block a lot of the projectiles. So I'm not being very efficient with my arrow play. I should be firing at the Black Ark Corsairs, as they do not have shields, and I believe I changed targets relatively soon. There you go. I changed my targets to the non-shielded versions, even though the Black Ark Corsairs have relatively high armor for how light they are. Now I'm moving up my front line, getting into position to fight his vastly superior front line of Bleak Swords and Blackguard of Nagron, and it's going to be a tough fight. So I do have Archer Fire, and I'm going to fire at his Charybdis, take out these high-value, large targets with my archers. And I'm going to have my Eyes of the Desert just got spotted and are going to be stay back. Make sure they're going to be my backline support. Can't get back into my archers. Make sure this doesn't happen. Over here on the right flank, he gets my Cold One Knights do intercept my Nekahara Warriors and Skeleton Horsemen, which is a very bad matchup for my Horsemen. But a little play here that I like to do is the Hammer and Anvil. Now, while my Horsemen are definitely not winning that fight, they can still hold the fight, and my Necropolis Knights flank all the way around and get a good charge into those Cold One Knights. Little thing here, he uses the Burning Skull, and he uses like the Creeping Darkness. I forgot this spell, but it looks like Creeping Darkness, and he obliterates my front line of skeleton units. This is awful for me, as now I have no front line to defend my skeleton archers, which is terrible. I use what reserves a skeleton spearman to try to stop the Blackguard of Nagron, but the Blackguard Nagron are simply just too good at they're too high of a stat block to stop my skeletons. Now over here, he does send his Charybdis into battle, but I remember I had my full anti-large crew of the Eyes of the Desert, Settra the Imperishable, my Tomb Prince to take down the Charybdis. Now my opponent does something very smart here. He sends his Charybdis into his infantry so that he has a buffer and to reduce the damage output that I can throw onto this Charybdis. Very efficient by my opponent, and it's gonna greatly reduce the effectiveness in which I can take out his very expensive monster. Now, unfortunately, over here in the back line, my archers do get compromised by Bleak Swords and the Supreme Sorcerer of Fire. But unfortunately for me, this is a very back-and-forth battle. I take out the Cold One Knights in the top right of the screen with my Hammer and Anvil charge, and I finally get my cavalry into his juicy skirmishers. Juicy, juicy skirmishers. They won't be very effective for much longer. And the Charybdis is going to finally rout as he buckles under the pressure of all my anti-large firepower, and it's going to be just a monster mash between all these Blackguard of Nagron. This is a terrible matchup. Blackguard Nagron very effective against the hordes of monsters that the Tomb Kings bring, and it's going to proc the curse. The curse, when the Tomb Prince goes below 50% health, he's going to curse the enemies. Actually, sorry, this is the Settra the Imperishable's curse, and cause a good amount of damage, which is nice, but it's just Settra has got hurt so much. The amount of fireball spam and anti-large capabilities are just extremely powerful. I do dodge that fireball, which is very fortunate for me. And this battle has been back and forth. The balance of powers in the Dark Elves' favor, but for just a few minutes before that, it was in my favor. So this is a very back and forth battle. I'm quite enjoying this. I get into a skirmishers. The skirmishers go, and the enemies do rampage as my Tomb Prince uses his rampage ability. I could have done a better job, and unfortunately my Tomb Prince gets sniped by the Supreme Sorceress of Fire, just chasing onto him, and Settra's going to have to run as well. Now my remaining forces here is going to be a Necropolis Knight, some skeleton horsemen archers, and I do not have a very large force left. I'm going to try to get some charges into the Bleak Swords, get whatever free value I can. Look at this. They never stood a chance. The Necropolis Knights with halberds may be an anti-large unit, but their stats are good enough and their mass is large enough to just destroy any infantry unit that's not built to damage other large units. I'm over here. I'm going to make sure the Charybdis gets out of the map. He's a huge, huge threat, and I do not want him to go into my horsemen. That would be devastating if he fights my horsemen. Only 4 kills on the Charybdis. I think I did pretty well with making sure this unit gets off the battlefield and is no longer effective. Now I'm just going to be cycle charging. I do have the mobility advantage here. So just cycle charging with my Necropolis Knights. My opponent's going to send another fireball in, and it's going to probably take a model or two. Just one model, but still very effective damage. Fireball spam has got to be one of the most annoying things to deal with in my experiences of Warhammer, like Spirit Leech and Fireball spam. Such an effective use of Winds of Magic. It's cheap, does a lot of damage, and it's just fantastic against single model units. I'm going to be using my Skeleton Horseman here. I just scare off the outskirts of his units, make sure they don't come back and reinforce him. Just a very little thing that you should be doing when you have the mobility advantage. Make sure your opponent's units do not come back onto the battlefield, because the more units they have, the more harder it is for you. Wow, Dylan. Yeah, my name's Dylan, though. And what knowledge? The more units they have, the harder it is for you. Fantastic tips and tricks with Poison Ducky, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be getting my line here. I'm going to make them stand still, as I want them to get their vitality back. Make sure they're no longer tired, because tired units are much less effective in combat than units that are drained or debilitated. And his units are quite tired. Like, they're literally chasing after very tired. Not as tired as I expected, but still tired, and I want to get my units back into tip-top shape, so I'm just going to make them stand still and get their stamina back. My other unit of horsemen are going to come back. They're active. They were essentially only used to scare off routing infantry, which is great value for a 400 unit cost. I'm going to slightly move position here, as I don't want my units. See now? Look, they're animated. They're green vitality, which is fantastic. You want that so that they can fight at full fighting capacity, and now these are diminished instead of being debilitated, which is quite nice. Now fading. Alright, so the Supreme Sorceress is going to try to get here, and I wanted to make my units no longer tired, so I was confident in my skills. I wanted to juke that fireball. I tried, I really did, but it hit Settra, and he only has 584 hit points left, which is not good. Now the balance of power is firmly in my opponent's favor at this point, but I still have a chance. I still do. At this point, I am out of Winds of Magic, and I am no longer... this becomes a strange dance, because the Blackguard of Nagaron will destroy my units. I only have large units left, and he has... I'm trying to get a shot onto his Bleak Swords and a shot onto his Black Arc Corsairs. Make sure thin his numbers out and then cycle charge the Black Guard of Nagron to oblivion. Now I kind of do a feint charge. I move here and then he tries to counter charge me. That's like, oh, that's good. His Black Guard are out of position, but my opponent is not dumb. He makes sure that his units are in good position, but he sends his Supreme Sources onto the ground, and I find this as an opportunity. I try to get a charge in, and he recognizes this. This is just like a little dance back and forth to try to see how do we get back into this game. Unfortunately, you guys didn't see this, but Settra does go down to some fireball spam. It's unfortunate. I should have dodged better, and I should have engaged the enemy while I still had him. A big mistake on my part. So I only have these cavalry units left. My only hard-hitting unit being the Necropolis Knights. And they're the anti-large version of the Necropolis Knights. They're not going to be fantastic against infantry. Now over here I see a juicy rear charge allowing me to get in there. I'm just going to try to cycle charge. And finally, I know his units are not brave, so I get my Necropolis Knights in here, and this is going to be the last charge. Who will win in this last battle? Necropolis Knights get into the rear of the Black Guard of Nagron, and it's going to be I'm going to try to cycle charge them in and out. I do have her leader, the Supreme Sorcerer, surrounded by my horses, and it's just a sea of like gray and white versus the purple of the Dark Elves. I'm going to move. I have the mass advantage with my Necropolis Knights, and I'm just going to try to get through, apply poison to everybody, and push through, get sure. I'm going to loop around here and make sure I try to snipe the Supreme Sorceress of Fire. I get good mass in here, apply the poison, very important. This is a very close last battle. I love the Necropolis Knights. It's such a fantastic unit. I just wish they were a little bit better. And unfortunately, due to army losses, my units crumble, and this is my first loss that I will be showcasing on this channel. It's unfortunate, but I really enjoyed this game. Let's see, look, my unit efficiency 30 kills, 10. I mean, like, they did their jobs. They could have done better, though. I could have done so much better. And unfortunately, the Skeleton Warriors were destroyed by the Burning Head and the Creeping Darkness ability of the Supreme Sorceress Fire. What I learned from this match is I cannot, by no means, have just a straight line of infantry. Especially against the Lord of Fire. I completely forgot how powerful the Lord of Fire can be against cheap, lowly armored infantry. And it was a huge misplay on my part. I think that might have lost the game for me, because that is what allowed my opponent to get into my archers and completely destroy my infantry core. Now, my skeleton horsemen actually did amazing for 400 cost each. They did a lot. They chased a lot of opponents off the battlefield. My Nekahara horsemen lost most of their health fighting Cold One Knights, which is a very bad matchup. I did take them off the battlefield eventually with my Necropolis Knights. Necropolis Knights, extremely effective with their high mass poison attacks, even if they're not anti-infantry. Fantastic in their own right. And my Skeleton Horseman archers did fairly well. They did a lot of HP damage. Almost all of my arrows were focused on the Charybdis. Charybdis got almost no value whatsoever. It was a nice push and pull. The Eyes of the Desert did well. They were fighting the enemy Cold One Knights. Shut down one unit Cold One Knights. No value from this Cold One Knights except for maybe some HP damage. This one did well against my own cavalry. So what I did very well here was I shut down his cavalry and his monsters. What my opponent did very well, it was shut down my infantry. And what was my advantage of my opponent? He had Black Guard of Nagron. I only had large units left. Black Guard of Nagron are tough cookies, and I lost that trade, unfortunately. I lost losing all my armies. It was a close battle. He lost 502. He was very close to routing. But nevertheless, it was a good loss, and it was a very fun match. Well, thank you, everybody, for watching, and if you liked it, leave a like or subscribe. I'll catch you guys later.